Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and a heavy subject today, but the extermination of Europe's Jews by the Nazis is widely known. Less discussed is the forced euthanasia of people with mental and physical disabilities that started, in fact, quite a lot earlier. Finding Ruth is my guest's book detailing her investigation into her great-aunt's death in 1941. Links to her website and the book are, of course, in the description below. I'll bring her in now. Good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we were just discussing before going live there the difficulties of dealing with the aspects of World War II that are uncomfortable and make us squirm, and it's horrible. It's horrible history. But before we get into your presentation, what's your background in terms of investigating the past? You've got several strings to your bow, as I understand.
Yes, actually, I have a master's in archaeology, which is something that I don't do that for work, but it is my passion. And I've always liked history. And years ago, I didn't know about my great aunt until I was in my 30s. And I was very close to my grandmother. And one day the topic came up and she just said something about her sister. And I said, I didn't know you had a sister. And the only thing she would tell me was the Nazis killed Ruth. And that was all I had to go on. So that was when my son was young. And when I went back to school, this was one of the projects I wanted to work on to find out what actually happened to my great aunt.
Well, brilliant introduction there. And we'll bring up your slides. And folks, what we're going to do is there are a lot of details that we're going to be hearing today. So we think that most of your questions will be answered as we go along, but bigger questions about perhaps remembrance or how we look back on the Nazi era, we'll kind of deal with them at the end. But I'm going to hand over to my guest to take us through this subject. And I always appreciate it when we have these personal shows when it isn't just history, it's family history. So I'm excited to hear it. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background on how I came across or why I wanted to research this project is because my great aunt was killed in the euthanasia program. And this is the way we are related is the woman on the right is my great grandmother. So she is the mother of my grandmother. She is also the mother of Ruth. Emma actually had Elsbeth in 1912, and then later on she met Paul Mühlmann, and that's when they had their 3 children. They had Ruth in 1920, Heinz in 1921, and Gunter in 1928. And this is some of the pictures. Thankfully, my aunt, who is my grandmother's daughter, had all these pictures, which were kind of rare to have pictures from this era in Germany. And she also was, if she's listening, my aunt, Tana Helen, she was a huge help in the oral tradition of finding this story. So Ruth was born on July the 11th of 1920, and she was baptized in this church on October 24th of 1920. And the reason I bring that up is to show you that she was not Jewish. She was a Christian, baptized Christian. So the people that are targeted in this program are not specifically, at the beginning, the Jewish people. Ruth was born healthy until she was 2 years old, and that's when she unfortunately contracted scarlet fever. And we're not sure exactly what her mental disabilities were from this. We do know that she did end up going to a hospital so she could go to school, because of course back then nobody had special schooling for children with special needs. So this is a picture of Ruth and her brother Heinz. I believe this is in their grandfather's garden, where I actually got to visit in 2022. And my third cousin owns the house, and he takes very good care of it. So it was an incredible experience to visit there. So starting in 1931, Ruth is enrolled in Neinstedt Hospital, and that is still an active hospital today. The records that they had do show that she was enrolled on April the 9th. And she went here mainly because she was going to get an education if she went here. These are some older postcards that I had found showing the institution. So you have the church on the left, what they call the Mädchen House, which is the facility for the girls, and it's separated by the doctor's house, and then the boys' house was on the right, and right in the middle is the school. So the Mädchen House on the bottom left, and this is about the time that Ruth would have attended, how it looked like on the outside. And on the lower right is a picture that I took in 2022. So you can see it's very much looks the same. Mm. Fortunately, I was able to find some old postcards on eBay that I purchased. This is the upper left-hand corner is the dormitory. So this is what it would have looked like when Ruth attended here. Very IKEA looking with the kind of Spartan, but very clean. There's the school on the lower corner, which it looks very much like that to this day. There were some postcards of the students in the classroom, and you can see that they are, boys and girls are mixed together, and they are, doing their studies. They're targeting the studies to their level of ability. Here's a couple more pictures of them, the children attending classes. And of course, the Germans love their physical education. So there's a slide on the lower right where the children are outside playing.
Because in general terms, this was sort of the 1920s and the 30s was a transitional era from the really dark days of treatment of mental illness in sort of Victorian times to the kind of more progressive 1950s, 60s, 70s when things got better and a better, thankfully, today. But the 30s was 20s that was bridging the fact that there were people around the world doing new things to give people a better education, but at the same time also some very horrible ideas in place. Is that a fair kind of analysis of the era?
Yes, I would say there were some really groundbreaking things. I think there was the doctor that worked at this hospital, Pesta. I have the book over here. That's what I'm trying to remember his name. Pesta Lazio. He did some really wonderful things, and about targeting the education to the ability of the student.
Yeah.
So there was some really good things that were coming out at this time.
Thank you.
When I was doing the research, maybe a generation ago or so, a lot of the scholars kind of had the attitude of the Germans didn't really care about these people. They just put them away in storehouses so they didn't have to deal with them. I found it very much the opposite here. The letters that were from Ruth's father that were in the file, they were pretty constant. They were checking up on her. He was interested in how she was doing. In fact, this one from April 14th, she's enrolled on April the 9th. So he dropped her off 5 days ahead, and he sends this letter to them. And basically the translation there is, I'm asking, could you tell me how she's doing and how is she fitting in? So I think that not only my family, but other families very much cared about their children, and they were trying to do what was best for them. They did go visit her very often, Ruth's family. This is a picture of my grandmother visiting Ruth, and they were not of very much economic means. So I don't want to, say they were poor, but they didn't have a whole lot of money. Luckily, there's a railway, that one of the oldest ones in Germany, and it's a single track, and it runs from Magdeburg down to Thala, and the second to last stop is right at Neinstedt. So they were able to take the train back and forth to home. There's letters about, could you go ahead and send us a train ticket for Ruth so we can get her home for the holidays. The children were able to go home twice a year for 4 weeks at a time. So generally the 4 weeks was in the summer for summer break, and then around the Christmas holidays in the wintertime. So the family was very involved in this. Here she is in 1932. There's a picture of her. She's doing very well at school. This is apparently one of the trips home around Christmas. And then we get into 1933, which I'm sure your viewers know a heck of a lot more about this than I do. But this is when Hitler comes into power, and the Nazi power is the only legal party. This is also when the very first strike against the people with disabilities comes into play in the Forced Sterilization Act, the law of the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases. And there were over 400,000 people that were sterilized by force. And that was in July of 1933. There were a number of conditions that made you eligible to be forcibly sterilized, including deafness, schizophrenia, epilepsy, blindness, any type of physical deformity, also alcoholism. Then we jump forward to the 1934-1935 period. And while Emma goes to visit Ruth, they find out that Ruth is no longer attending class. And this probably is due to the fact that around this time in Germany, most students stopped schooling at the age of 14. So the boys would go on to learn a trade, and the young women would go on either to be nannies and maids or something. But they were no longer officially attending school at age 14. So Paul writes a letter and he says, well, if Ruth is no longer attending class, we're going to bring her home. And that's what they did. They took her home from Neinstedt on May 13th, 1934. There's a lot of documents, official government documents in here dealing with Ruth. They had to tell the Burgermeister when she was coming and going. And I think part of that was because some of this was a government supported kind of a social program, so financial means. Now this, is this the one? I can't see my thing. This is the first document in the folder where you see the salutation of Heil Hitler.
And I know you're going to explain a bit later on just the process of discovering and uncovering all these documents, because there's this idea that there's nothing left from the Third Reich area. All the documents were burned. They covered all their tracks, and already we're barely 10 minutes in, and you're uncovering incredible documents.
Well, yes, and I am very fortunate that, and I will tell you why that is in just a little bit.
Cool, thank you.
Now, almost exactly a year later, they readmit Ruth to Neinstedt. And I didn't know why until I went and actually visited Neinstedt. And they were able to tell me it's because they started up a new class. And they had contacted her parents and said, hey, we're starting up a new class. It's targeted for whatever reason, to the students, certain students. And then Ruth, so they're like, great, this is wonderful. Ruth was doing good there. We're going to readmit her. And you can see in this paperwork that she's readmitted on May the 11th of 1935. So originally she was admitted in April of 1931. She goes home for a year, which is an important fact. And then regarding documents, and then she's readmitted in May 1935. This is a lovely, I have two pictures like this. So my grandmother had emigrated to the United States in 1930 by herself. She's 18 years old because there's basically nothing for her in Germany. So she's looking for a better to get some kind of job and do better economically, because as you know, the economy was pretty bad in Germany at the time. So she saves up enough money in 5 years and she goes home for a visit. She is there from July to August of 1935. And this is the only pictures I have of it's my grandmother on the left, and then there's Ruth. There is their aunt, and the gentleman in the middle is Paul Mühlmann. So that's Ruth's father and Elspeth's stepfather. And the next lady is their mother, Emma. And then there's a family friend. So I love this picture of them having such a good time in 1935. And there's one more shot of the same group in a different way. Now, this would be the last time that this trip to Germany would be the last time that my grandmother saw any of these people alive, which is it's very saddening. I wish I could end the story right there. But so now we jump ahead to 1939. And this is when the Aktion T4 program goes into effect. It actually began in October when Hitler ordered it, but he backdated the letter to September the 1st. You can see it on the official order here is September 1st. And of course, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that, but that is the day that Germany invades Poland. So he's thinking he can conduct this program under the chaos of war. On the order, he charges the two doctors that he knows with responsibility for expanding the authority of physicians so that the patients that are considered incurable can be granted a mercy killing. And Aktion T4 actually translates to Operation T4. The T4 comes from the location of their headquarters. This picture of this villa is the headquarters of Aktion T4. This is where they developed their grand schemes. And it was located at Tiergartenstrasse 4, Berlin. This villa was actually owned by a Jewish family, and the Nazis kicked them out, took this place over. And today, this is where the National Monument to the Euthanasia victims is located. If you're ever in Berlin, I have a picture of the memorial later on in my presentation, but if you're ever there, it's a very emotional place to visit. If you can, definitely visit it. The Nazi eugenics is very much into play. You know, you've heard about the Aryan race and all this type of thing. So people with any kind of mental or physical disabilities were, of course, a target of this. And the way the Nazis they don't promote their program. They very much do their propaganda based on money. So these people with disabilities are taking your money, and you know, it plays right to the greed of people. So the one on the left is they're saying this person is costing you $60,000 Reichsmarks a year to take care of him. And then on the right-hand side is that per day it's costing 5.5 marks to take care of this people. And wouldn't that 5.5 marks be better spent on this little, you know, Aryan family on the left-hand side? So I don't know about their math, but 5.5 a day does not equal 60,000 a year. But anyway, so they'd come up with a target formula for what they wanted to do with Aktion T4, the number of people they wanted to get rid of. And this was all based on economic studies that they did. So the formula was 1,000 to 10 to 5 to 1. And that was calculated on, for every 1,000 German citizens, 10 of them had some type of disability. And of those 10, 5 needed to be institutionalized. So if they could get rid of one of every one of those 5s, it would save X amount of Reichsmarks every year. So that was their target. The criteria for the Aktion T4 were people they considered to be useless eaters, which were people that were deemed to be not employable, and people who had been institutionalized for more of 5 years. Now, this is the wording that they use, which, of course, today is considered very offensive.
Yep.
So I won't go down there. Criminals and delinquents were included in this, alcoholics. And one of the main reasons they wanted to keep this secret is that war invalids from World War I, so actual German veterans that were institutionalized as a result of injuries they received in fighting for the fatherland during World War I, were also included in this. So they were killing off German veterans. It ended up with 6 major euthanasia centers. I can't really point them out, but they're all over Germany. It was Brandenburg, Bernburg, Hadamar, Grafenik, Hartheim, and Bernburg. So, Sonnenstein, excuse me.
Right.
This was the actual form that the Aktion T4 people sent to every hospital, and it was filled out by doctors that supposedly evaluated them. That's all. I talk about that in my book. Basically, most of these doctors, it was calculated, spent about 2 or 3 minutes on each person for their evaluation. And the important part was down here on the left-hand side, which I've blown up. If there was their decision, then the hospitals didn't realize what was going on until people started getting shipped out and then disappearing. So, but the doctors would put in there either a blue minus sign, which meant this person was okay, we're not including them, or they put a red cross or red plus sign. And if that was the case, then this person was chosen to be part of the Aktion T4 program.
Right.
So it started in 1939. I'm going to jump ahead to 1941. Ruth is still doing amazingly well at Neinstedt. She is there. Her family comes and visits. She goes home for visits. On January 29th of 1941, she gets transferred without her parents' knowledge and without her parents' consent to a different hospital. And this was called the hospital's Auschwitz. The gap that I have in the records comes into play, and it's very important because there's no notes in the records from May 15th, 1935, when she's readmitted, until January 29th, 1941. And this is the only entry on the remaining records that there is. So she's here. Well, I should say that the hospital, Auschwitz, the only piece of paper document that they could give me was this. And it does show that Ruth was there. She did arrive on January 29th of 1941. And then she is transferred on March 31st, 1941. And the reason that they're doing that with the patients is they're kind of playing a little shell game, because there's starting to be rumors that people are starting to talk about, these patients disappearing. So they're very much trying to hide their tracks. So they're transferring these people around so that the families don't know where they are. So on May 31st, 1941, Ruth and 74 other people get transferred to Bernburg Hospital. So just to recap, she lives up north in Magdeburg. Near the city of Thal is Neinstedt Hospital. They transfer her down toward the bottom there near Halle, and then she ends up in Bernburg in the middle. So they're moving her all around. This is a very early picture of Bernburg Hospital, which is still in existence today. It was built in 1875. The top photo is from about 1900. And if you could see so basically the second building from the left is the one in the picture below that. And that is the building in the bottom floor that they converted to the Euthanasia Killing Center. And there was a doctor that was in charge of the rest of the hospital, and there was a doctor that was in charge of just this specific area. The way that they got the patients, they would transport the patients, are on these buses. They were called the Geekrat buses, and I'm not even going to try to say that. My German is not that good. But it translates a charitable foundation for the transport of patients. And this was the guy who was in charge of this was a cousin or brother of one of the guys in charge of the Aktion T4. So quite a bit of nepotism going on here. So they would load the people up. They had transportation attendants that would take the patients and put them on the buses and get them from place to place. And this is the route that the bus would take. They actually built a garage on the side of the building because, again, people were starting to question. They see these buses coming in. They see people getting off of here. And in the case of March 31st, there's 75 patients that get off of these buses, and nobody sees them or hears from them again after that day. So they're trying, by having the bus go into the garage, there's less people to see who's getting off of these buses. This is in the basement of the building. On the right-hand side is the first floor where they would come in. The nurses would receive all the patients. They would check their paperwork to make sure that it matched the patient. They would then get them undressed because they told them they were going to go have a very nice meal. But first they had to have a shower. So, and this didn't upset any people or draw any special attention or concern, because most of the time with institutions in Germany, the shower facilities were on the basement floor.
Right. Okay.
So they would march the people downstairs to the cellar and start to put them into the shower room. Bernburg has done an incredible job at maintaining this and making this a memorial. Because this is the actual gas chamber that we were able to, if you go there, you can actually visit this. So once they started to cram 75 people in here, then there started to be some resistance. This is the door. This is replica. This is not the actual door that was on there. This is looking from the outside in. You can see that little window so that they could view what was going on inside. And this is from the inside looking out. So you can see how thick that wall is. There are 2 shower heads in this gas chamber that are original shower heads, which I just thought to be incredible. This is the hard part. So if you look at this floor, you can see there's just a slight slant to the left. So where the arrow is there's a drain.
Right.
And listen, the engineering on this is pretty incredible. But so they would pack everybody in here and shut the door, and then they would turn on the gas. And the person looking through is taking notes on how long it takes once they turn on the gas, because that's the next thing they do would be to turn on the gas, how long it takes for these people to die. So they were basically guinea pigs in this whole gas chamber, the advancement of the technology of that.
And I think we should just remind ourselves, although the sidebar is saying it, this is years ahead of the industrial scale killings that were happening in the death camps later on in the war. This is before that. This
right.
This is the era of the Holocaust of bullets, that we would call it, where they, in other areas, the Third Reich has not yet perfected its extermination of people. But this is early. It's just awful. I mean, obviously.
So they get everybody in here, and according to their calculations, it took about, once the gas was turned on, it took about 4 to 5 minutes for people to lose consciousness. And about 10 to 15 minutes for everybody to be completely killed. However, during that time when the gas is coming in, you've got people in there and they're terrified. They realize that they're not getting a shower. Something's going on. These people would vomit. Many of them urinated on themselves or defecated on themselves. They are fighting with each other to get out. So there's all kinds of bodily fluids on this floor. So the cleanup of this was made very easy with your slanted floor after you go in and clear the bodies out. So again, I just want to, the gas chamber, then next they would go either to the dissecting room or the mortuary, and they would stack up the bodies there. And then they would start to turn on the cremation ovens, and they would work 24/7 until all the bodies were cremated. I did find out when I went to Bernburg, they were able to look at their records. I couldn't look at their records because of privacy information, but they were able to tell me that my aunt was not dissected. When they checked the records when they were coming in, they looked for interesting cases. It seemed like the majority of what they considered to be interesting were maybe people with epilepsy, and they would actually dissect their brains in the dissecting room before they would then burn the bodies. This is the dissecting room. This is a rare photo of one of the original tables. They don't know what happened to the original tables. The ones that are there are replicas. And I think they've done a very nice job of being somber, but also being reflective of these two cremation ovens, which are no longer there. The arrows indicate where the cremation ovens were, and it's just a black wall with light on it. And in the middle of that is a book. And in that book is the name of all the people that were killed in Bernburg in 1941. And I found out from them that this is where Ruth had actually died. And it was a very symbiotic relationship that I had with Bernburg, because they could tell me that this is where she died, and I could tell them about her life. That she wasn't just a number in the Nazis' checklist. In fact, they have her, with our permission, they have educational material written up with my Ruth on there, and saying that she had a family and she was loved, and the letters that were written from her father. And just, to me, this shows the people that go in there see that this is a person. You know, it's like kind of like when you go in the Holocaust Museum and you see these numbers and you don't comprehend until you see all the shoes. And then you're like, you know, starting to understand the whole horror of it. While there were 6 centers, there was only 4 that were operating at one time. Bernburg operated in 1941 because Brandenburg was previously the one that they were shipping the patients to. But again, people were starting to get very suspicious about Brandenburg. It was more of a town surrounding the Brandenburg Euthanasia Center. And the children, when they would see the geek buses going up the hill, they would tease each other and go, you're going to go get burned in the oven, you know, if you misbehave. So then the crematory ovens would go for a couple of days after these buses arrived. So people aren't stupid. They're observing this. This is a very rare photo of the ovens being on at Brandenburg. So they closed down Brandenburg and they built Bernburg. So of course they had to notify the families that the patients had died. They actually had a list of 61 unverifiable causes of death that they would use, because of course they can't use that, you know, we gassed them to death. I do not know, we don't have a copy of Ruth's letter, but this is a letter that's available online of one that was sent to a family. And it basically says, we regret to inform you that your family member passed away of fill in the blank. And, but isn't it really kind of a blessing, because, you know, they had these issues. So some of the examples of causes that they used were appendicitis, meningitis, pneumonia, strokes. Oral tradition in our family is that Ruth died they told her parents that she died of a bad reaction to a flu shot. So basically anaphylactic shock.
Right.
And then, of course, they had to tell them that the bodies were cremated due to a threat of infectious diseases. So there's no way to confirm any kind of death. So they sent out the falsified death notice. And I don't know if her parents ever got ashes. Some of the hospitals would send the ashes free to the families. Some of them were charging quite a bit of money. But I know they did make them jump through hoops if they wanted the ashes. The families, once they got the letter, were told they had 30 days to send documentation that they actually had a plot that they could bury their people in. So you're talking during a war, they would have to go out and buy a cemetery plot, get it verified, and and get the information to the hospital within 30 days. So I don't know how many families actually got the ashes. And of those that did, there was one family that received their male family member's ashes, and there was a bobby pin in there. Because, of course, it wasn't their family member's ashes. They were just shoving these in here as fast as they could to get them all burnt. So they would just scoop some up in an urn and send it. This is Ruth's. It's her birth certificate, but they also, in Germany, when they had it, they would put the death information on the same page. And I've blown it up here. So another thing they did was not only did they falsify the cause of death, they falsified the place of death and the date of death to make it even more confusing, so that the families couldn't ever try to track down the hospital and show up and try to find out what had happened to their family member. Well, Ruth died on March 31st, 1941 at Bernburg, which is documented by numerous sources. It gets reported on her death certificate that she died at Hadamar Hospital on April the 19th of 1941. So Bernburg was probably about a 30-minute drive from her parents' house. They didn't have a car, but in today's transportation, that's what it would be. Hadamar was over a 3-hour drive away. So again, they were making sure that the families didn't show up having any questions. Originally, before we went to visit Bernburg, I thought some of the hospitals, there was documentation that they dumped the ashes into a river that was nearby. So there is a Saale River that runs right along Bernburg. So that's originally what I thought happened. While I was there, we were informed that is not what happened with the ashes at all. There was a gentleman that came forth about, I guess now probably 25, 30 years ago, that worked for the hospital, and he was the one in charge of taking the horse with the wagon full of ashes down to the edge of the property of Bernburg Hospital, where there was a big trash midden where they would dump all the refuse from the hospital. So, anything from broken bedpans, dirt, torn up sheets, you name it.
Right.
It was in this trash pit, and that is where they dump the ashes. There has been an archaeological study on it, and they have determined that there's no way that they can differentiate the different layers. A lot of people, when they think of archaeology, they think of it like a layer cake, kind of like Troy. It was like the different levels of occupation were pretty clear and defined. This would not be. The ashes, it's also very clay-like. It's right along the riverbanks. So there's no way to be able to tell where the ashes were and get any of those human remains in any type of really way that would be able to recover them properly. And in the meantime, this little little village of New Bornen was built on top of it. Most people think the trash midden was underneath where the soccer field is. So I end my book with a plea to the city to put up some type of memorial there, which is not today. There's nothing there today marking it. And this is the hedgerow on the edge of the soccer field. And my friend Will, he would love your channel. He's a World War II expert and aficionado. And he drove me down here, and we got out of the car. And this was a couple of days after we'd done a tour of the gas chamber, because I just couldn't do it the same day. And I very much felt when we got out of here, I saw the forsythia was blooming, and this is in January, so it's a little early for forsythia to bloom in Germany. I walked up to the hedgerow, and you can choose to believe me or not, but there was such a feeling of peace that came over me. And I truly believe that was Ruth being relieved that her family finally knew where she actually was.
Powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Whew.
So The people that worked at the euthanasia killing centers were very much sought out for staffing some of the killing centers that were starting to be built, like Belzec, Zobor, and Treblinka. And there's a whole section of that in my book about specific people that worked there that went on to these places. So the lessons they learned from Aktion T4 was, one, how to kill, how much gas it took, how many people they could kill at one time. They also learned that they could get away with it. Hitler was very emboldened by this. And to me, Aktion T4 is crucial in the genesis of the gas chambers development for the final solution. The end of Aktion T4 came in August of 1941. Some of the scholars debate. There started to be a little bit of political pushback, or public pushback. And one of them was a Bishop von Galen, who actually gave a sermon in which he talked about that people with disabilities they think they were being killed. I mentioned some mistakes were being made. One of those was one of the patient's families were told that the patient had died of appendicitis, and they were like, that's impossible. They had their appendix out 10 years ago. So these little, mistakes were being made. The other thing was the war on the Russian front was starting to heat up. They didn't want any rumors about them killing World War I German veterans to get to the troops that they're expecting to be fighting on the Russian front. And the other thing was they had reached their goal of over 70,000 people with disabilities killed. Now, while Aktion T4 ended, there was two other euthanasia programs that kept going. And that is one of the reasons they have such a hard time putting a real number on how many people were killed in this. 20, 30 years ago, they were thinking 200,000. And now that we've been able to get some of the records from the former East Germany, that number's climbed to over 300,000 people.
And we had a question from Gary. Do you think it is yourself personally towards the upper end?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay,
definitely. Especially the euthanasia program, they turned the wild euthanasia. They made vehicles, they converted vehicles into mobile gas chambers, and they would take them to battlefields. And the soldiers that they thought were probably too far gone to help, they'd put them in there. And if they found Roma or Sinti people along the way, they'd throw them in there. It didn't matter, So yeah, I definitely think it was on the upper end.
Okay, thank you.
The records went with the patient, and this is a picture here of one of the Geekrat transports, and the transportation attendants and doctors, and they're actually looking at the paperwork that are going with the patients. Those records were all destroyed because the records went with the patients. Once the patients were killed, those records eventually ended up at the Aktion T4 headquarters. And when they realized that they were going to lose the war, they destroyed these records because they didn't want to be charged with crimes against humanity. One of the incredible things about my great aunt, and the reason I have any of her records at all, is that gap in the year when she went home. So I have her records from 1931 to 1934 with a couple of notes on it from the 1935 to 1941. So I have no records from 1935 to 1941. And when I went to Neinstedt, they were very gracious. This is Natalie, one of the employees. She pulled out the actual file and she could show me, and she went through every single, there were 55 documents in there, and she went through and translated each one for me. And this is where I found out that Ruth was not sterilized there, and their reasoning was that she's institutionalized, so there wouldn't be an opportunity for her to, worry about getting pregnant. So it was very touching to be able to see these letters, to see the actual letters from her father. And this is very, very rare. And it's only because of that gap where she had gone home for a year that we had any of these records left. So, and that was part of their purpose was, they didn't want people to talk about and to just forget about these family members. And there's a great quote, "Forgetting the extermination is part of the extermination itself." So these 300,000 people plus have not been included in the Holocaust. They have not been included in any type of genocide because the United Nations does not consider persons with disabilities to be a qualifying factor. And I understand the political sensitivity of having of persons included in the Holocaust, and I'm not saying these people should be part of the Holocaust, but I am saying this is definitely a prelude to the Holocaust. And one of the best quotes I found, it's from Matthew Rosell. He wrote a number of books about World War II history, but by definition, the T4 euthanasia program is not the Holocaust, but it is concurrent and it intersects.
Yeah.
So I think that's right on the money. And this is one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Suzanne Knuppel of Utrecht University. She's done a lot of work on this. Since there are no survivors of the Aktion T4, there can only be vicarious witnesses. And that's giving voice to the silent and silenced victims. And that's what I consider myself to be, a vicarious witness.
Yeah, exactly.
And there is some remembrances for people. There's the picture of the stone. That's the stone out front of Bernburg, and they have a ceremony there every year on January 27th, 29th, 27th. I'm getting mixed up. International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We actually, Will and I spoke there in January of 2020, right before COVID hit. And they let us light a candle in remembrance for Ruth inside. The paver is at my church in Cockeysville, Maryland. I was able to put that down for her. And we also had a Stoppelstein installed in front of her parents' house in Magdeburg, Germany, where she last lived with her parents. This is the picture of the National Memorial in Berlin. It's probably about a 10-minute walk from the Holocaust Memorial. So 15-minute walk from the Brandenburg.
And I'm now kicking myself. I was there a few weeks ago, a couple months ago now, and I was at the Holocaust Memorial. And I saw the one to the Romany, but I didn't see this one. But I was only there for one day, less than a day.
Oh, okay.
But, next time. Yes.
Put on your list for next time. And this is Ruth's American family. This was my dad's 85th birthday. So there's 2 more babies that need to be added to this. But Ruth is remembered by her family. And then I have and
then there's the all important link and well, I mean, an amazing presentation and all the more that you can get through it. I know you've done it a few times before, but it is so personal and so horrific. And so thank you for sharing it with us. And folks, I urge you to go to the website and consider getting a copy. But there's a few questions have been coming in, and I'm going to start with one. And it's the paradoxical nature of this being both a public policy and secret at the same time. I can't quite get my head around this aspect of that, in that they're covering it up in terms of what the families are learning personally, and yet you showed us the posters of the fact that euthanasia is part of policy. So how do you quantify that where this sits on this line between being public and secret?
That's a very good question. So part of the reason they were able to do this is because the Nazis controlled the press.
Right.
I'm so adamant about having freedom of the press in the United States because they controlled all of that. So there was nothing in the press about this. And as far as families talking amongst themselves, one of the reasons they started moving people around is one, and I don't remember the name of the village, but there was 3 people that died on the same day. Let me say 3 institutionalized people with disabilities that died on the same day in this village. And that's because they were all the same place at the same time, and they carted them off and killed them. So people are like, what's going on? This person died of pneumonia. This person died of, anaphylactic shock. It's too coincidental. So people did start to talk. There were rumors. There was one man who, I'm not sure who he addressed. I don't know if he went to the hospital or if he went to the local politicians, and he questioned it. And basically he was told, they said to him, well, you have other children, right? You sure you want to push this? So in a very undermined ways, threatening the rest of his children. So people were too scared to speak out. And then there's also the stigma of, which was very strong in Germany at that time, of having somebody with some type of mental or physical disability.
Yeah.
So there are, when my dad and my aunt went to Germany in 2010 or 2011, they met their first cousin who was a niece of Ruth. She never knew about Ruth. It was not talked about. Why? I can't speak to that, but part of it was that very much that stigma, the Aryan race. You had to be, white, perfect, and very much in shape, that type of thing.
And it's just, that interesting aspect that, when certain German citizens said they didn't know about the Holocaust, I know this isn't the Holocaust, you made that clear, but, you couldn't not notice entire streets being cleared and people being taken away, murdered. But in this case, when families receive these letters with false information, but they would have had no idea that these were being sent out on an industrial scale. Their first assumption would be, well, this is just an unfortunate problem that happened to my child, my sister, my relative.
Right.
So it would be easier to conceal it in that way, because it's not like today, when thankfully there are support networks for people who have family members who have mental issues, even for, people I know myself. There's all these support networks. It's not like Ruth's family would be part of some social group where they have a WhatsApp group where they discuss, have you heard about this new, therapy thing they're starting at the hospital? It was a very different era where, as you said, everything was kept kind of hushed and quiet, and there's a stigma, and in a sense quite easy for the Third Reich to conceal it, tragically.
Yes. Well, and my grandmother said, so they must have suspected something. Maybe after the war, they started hearing some things, but she said the Nazis killed Ruth, but that's all she would say. And that's all I had to go on originally. So it was a bit tough doing the research.
Yeah. We had a couple of questions specifically about the details earlier on. So Scott Grimwood, regular viewer and indeed a guest at one time, is saying that in the list of reasons, polio wasn't listed, which he thought was surprising, given that was so widespread back there. You listed the reasons that was polio some further down on the document, or was it? Did you ever see it listed?
I don't remember polio being on that list. I thought that was more of an issue in the 50s.
Well, I mean, but that came up in the sidebar that it was particularly common in the 50s, but the others were saying, no, it was definitely around in the 20s and 30s. Right. Maybe it wasn't big enough to be a specifically listed thing, but it would be, included as a subcategory. But maybe someone knows the answer to that and they can expand that. Now, the other thing, the question we had from Ian is about at these, I don't really want to use the word hospitals, because it sounds like, these places where they were exterminating, gassing these people. Who was actually organizing the community? Was it medical staff? Were there people coming in from the state? What was it? Were there SS people there? Who was actually overseeing this process?
Okay, so there were specifically medical staff, right, and they weren't with the rest of the hospital. They were specially hired just to work on these euthanasia killing centers, and it was nurses and it was doctors. Right. And there were interviews after the war, the doctor's trial that they had, and there was a nurse that her name was Olga something. It's in my book, but she said, I never thought of them again. It was just, that's how it was.
Well, terrible stuff. Lots of people have been saying things that even just sharing it on World War II TV, Ruth is not forgotten, says Lisa. Which is fantastic. And several people have said, including Lisa, that she's going to go out and immediately buy the book. Another, a grim question, but someone wanted to know, Joe 45, Sorry if I missed it. Were these being studied? We're talking about the dissections article. Was this the universities, medical people, who was doing the examinations specifically?
There was a oh God, I can't think of the guy's name. There was a deal that was set up, and it was a guy that was working in an institute. And I forgot the name of the institute. It's now the Max Planck Institute, and it was a big story about 20 years ago or so. And they had found this material. There were slides with brain tissue on there, and they ended up doing a ceremony and burying them with respect. But it wasn't, I don't think, any more than 15, 20 years ago that this was done. So they were looking at this and studying it. I don't know what they hoped to find from it. But yeah, they were still.
No. Well, thank you for answering. Jim Walsh, who's a Patreon, a brigadier level Patreon, is saying, did they use liquid cough drugs like Ligactil for patient pacification? The photos allude. Now, I think you did say there was certain amounts of panic and distress, but was there, to your knowledge, was there any attempts during this process to try and pacify people before their deaths?
I don't think so. From what the testimony that I saw, the personal testimony from people of the transportation attendants, if there was resistance, they just used physical force. They just shoved them into these rooms or drug them onto the buses. I mean, it could have been. If there is, I'm not aware of it.
Okay, thank you. And Gregory is asking, could you mention how the T4 program relates to the Lebensborn program?
Okay, I'm not familiar with the Lebensborn.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what that is, but Gregory, perhaps you want to explain. We'll try and get to that. But I think that's most of the questions there. And I just want to kind of end with asking you about. You talked about these efforts to get a memorial in the towns, and the fact that Ruth herself is memorialized with the stone and what have you, and the monuments and the book indeed. But this is a story that should be more widely known, because it goes into the methodical nature of the Nazis' determination to wipe people out who didn't fit the Aryan bill. How, it's an open-ended question, but how do we get these stories out there? How do we? I mean, Auschwitz is the most single-visited site of Nazi exterminations. 1.8 million visitors last year. Was the official announcement a couple of weeks ago. But how do we get people to know about this aspect, which, as you said, there is not part of the Holocaust, but it's directly related to and ancillary to?
Very, very good questions. I actually wrote the book. I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to find out what happened to my great aunt. And then as I would share some of this stuff on Facebook, I had and some of my Jewish friends were like, I've never heard of this before. You should write a book. You should write a book. So that's how that ended up coming to be. It was because I was looking for her, I was able to find the records, but I think there's people that don't know that there were family members that were killed. So to find these records would be very hard for them. The other thing is the privacy laws in Germany are much more strict than they are in the United States. United States, basically, when you die, generally speaking, your right to privacy ends. In Germany, I believe it's 80 years that the privacy hits. So in order for me to see the records for Ruth, I had to prove that I was a family member, which luckily I had the old pictures so I could show my grandmother with them. There are two things that are coming up. One of the people I met David Mitchell, who's a professor at George Washington University, and he and his son have made a movie called Disposable Humanity, which is hopefully going to be available for general viewing soon. They were in some specialized film festivals and things like that, and it's all about this topic. They've done 20 years worth of research, and they interviewed Dr. Suzanne Knuppel, family members and things like that. So that's going to be phenomenal when that comes out and really add a lot of light to it. And just this week, I found out one of the other ladies I met who wrote a biography about her family member who died in the euthanasia, and I'm apologize if I'm saying it wrong, Sigrid Falkenstein. She's done a lot of work advocating for this. She had posted that there on January 30th of 2025, the Bundestag is going to do a, like, I guess like a debate. And I don't know if you'd call it a bill or a program, but there's a, for lack of a better term, my ignorance, say there's a bill that they're going to be discussing to hopefully, from what I understand, because my German's not the best, is kind of connect the different the institutions that have records so that they have a consistent way for people to search, maybe making them more digitized, because there's, right now, like the records I found were Ruth were only hard copy in that actual place. And I was fortunate enough to be able to travel there. Not everybody can do that. So hopefully they're going to acknowledge that these euthanasia victims, which really hasn't been done before in Germany. And the other thing is to have this program so people, the research, the documents, everything like that can be more centralized and made more available.
I think the other thing is coming up in the sidebar about you talked about it yourself, the shame and humiliation aspect of it, in that countless families were offering their family members to help from the state. They thought they were doing the right thing to put their family member in an environment where they could be cared for in the best way possible, because it wasn't possible at home, etc., etc., etc. And then therefore, down the line, when the true events come out, there could be some completely misplaced shame, because let's be clear, the only people who are responsible for this awful tragedy are the Nazis. The family members who willingly but completely naively sent their family members off for this treatment, they have nothing to be ashamed about, embarrassed about. But I can understand. And then you add that with the fact of you said the stigma of mental health issues within a family, within sterilization, with all that as well. It could be a potentially difficult subject, even 80 years on, for family members in Germany and others who spread around the world, to just talk about it, to just talk about without these complicated feelings.
Yes.
Yeah, it's awful stuff. But we will bring things to an end there, because I really want people to watch this show, because it's important stuff to do, and people have been thanking me. Don't thank me, thank people like my guests coming forward with these stories for doing it. But yeah, it's not a show about the best tank and which aircraft is this. It's not even about rogue heroes. You've got shows about that coming up. This is an important topic. So Ilka, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing this work. Thank you for what you've done for Ruth, for your family, and for just giving everybody a very personal understanding of this awful aspect of those awful years. So thank you very much. I urge people to go straight to your website and do it. So folks, I'm back again, 2 more shows tomorrow. We've got one about Pacific Rex, and we've got one with Tim Cook discussing Canada and America's relationship in World War II. So as always, consider visiting my guest websites, becoming a patron or a YouTube member, and thank everybody for questions. But for right now, I'm going to say enjoy the rest of your day if you can after this harrowing subject. But thank you, everybody. This is Paul Woodedge for World War II TV saying good night. Good night.